Gary Steele, CEO of Splunk, joins us to talk about the company's strong Q1 earnings. We also dive into what the company's customers are looking for and how that's shifting Splunk's strategy. We'll talk about observability, security, and then we'll tease what's going to happen at this year's Splunk.conf conference. Strap in, you're with us for this episode of Making Markets.
This is the Making Markets podcast, brought to you by the Futurum Group. We bring you top executives from the world's most exciting technology companies, bridging the gap between strategy, markets, innovation, and the companies featured on the show. The Making Markets podcast is for information and entertainment purposes only. Please do not take anything reflected in this show as investment advice. Now, your host, CEO of the Futurum Group, Daniel Newman.
Gary Steele, CEO of Splunk, welcome back to Making Markets.
Thank you, Daniel. It's great to be here.
It is good to have you back. And it hasn't been that long since we've talked. I had you at the 6.5 Summit just last month, and that was a great conversation. We dug in a lot on security. But one of the things we don't do at the 6.5 Summit that I do here on Making Markets is I like to talk about, well, the market. I like to talk about the financials, the business, the performance. And you had a pretty good Q1, and the market seemed to respond to it really well. Tell us a little bit about the Q1 results and talk about how you're thinking about running the business right now in this sort of choppy economic era.
Yeah, no, we felt really good about our results. I really want to thank all the Splunkers that participated in that. We've been focused on balancing growth and profitability, and I think we delivered a great set of results. We had nice growth on the top line, and we were able to continue to manage costs quite well. Our actual OpEx was down 1% year over year. And as a result of that, we had great cash flow production. So really right in line with what we wanted to deliver, and we felt really good about that outcome.
Yeah, I think that's important. I mean, one of the things, though, like I was trying to say, Gary, is there is still a lot of uncertainty, right? I mean, we feel like we've seen kind of what has now been deemed the Magnificent Seven have skyrocketed against the backdrop of what has been, economic uncertainty, high interest rates, unknowns on inflations, a relatively hawkish Fed, some conservativeness in hiring, rifts in all the around the marketplace. So for a growth tech company like Splunk, you don't have the same latitude in terms of your investors, institutions to be quite as bold as those seven companies. No one else does. It's like the seven. And by the way, they're propping up all the averages. They're making everything look a little better than it maybe really is. So, what are you thinking about, or how are you thinking about running the business right now when there is still quite a bit of unknown? And even if there's going to be that recession and hard landing, I still don't think we know 100% that there won't be.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. So if you go back to July of last year, we started to see the impact of the economic environment. And one of our big focuses is moving customers to the cloud. We saw some of those cloud migrations be a little less certain. We saw that all the way through until we got to January. And then we talked about the fact that we saw more deal scrutiny, so more oversight on how deals were getting done. And so as we walked into this fiscal year, we really were thoughtful about our guidance to make sure that we were accommodating that. And we just have assumed that things, frankly, don't get any better, that they stay pretty much constant. And as we execute through that, we're really focused on how do we deliver real value to our customers, help them through the maturity journey. And we do that in a really efficient way. I've been on a mission to drive balance between growth and profitability, and we've continued to deliver on that. And I think that's going to be important this year. But we took into account what we had seen from a macro perspective as we built our guidance out for the year. So I feel really good about where we are today, the way the team's been executing, and the value that we're delivering to customers.
Well, that actually segues really nicely to where I wanted to go. I hit you on your strategy and your business decision making, but you also are impacted and affected by your customers and how your customers feel. And frankly, customers that need security and IT operations, observability come from all industries. And while the tech industry maybe has fared a little better, and you could probably argue that this generative AI boom has been a bit of a tailwind for everybody in tech.
Sure.
A lot of industries haven't necessarily felt that same tailwind. Industries like retail or manufacturing, which has had tons of supply chain issues. Tell me a little bit about what your customers are looking for right now, and kind of how you're thinking about your strategy in terms of supporting their needs in these times.
Yeah, overall, our focus has been driving broad resilience in their business. So, helping organizations deal with the broad range of cyber issues to drive resilience there. But thinking more broadly about as companies built out a more digital footprint, how do we help them keep that up and running all the time? And that's really our focus, which has been around resilience. And so when we're engaging with customers, it's really under that framework, and then also helping them think about how can they save money. Can we actually help them consolidate vendors, drive simplification in their IT infrastructure, make it easier for them to manage these complex environments. And I think that's been a very important role that we've played. And we noted in our earnings script, a couple examples of customers where we're driving consolidation, and that consolidation ultimately saves them money and drives simplification.
Yeah, and speaking of simplification, one of the biggest challenges that enterprises have right now is about value from data and dealing with their data at scale. We're talking a lot of petabyte scale now. We're talking exabytes. We're talking massive, and of course, with all the AI boom, ambient data, edge data, cloud data, on-prem data, the need for observability cannot be understated. And you can see it in some of the market moves that are being made by both you and competitors in the market. Is companies are trying to get a better handle on their IT landscape. They're trying to figure out how to manage the FinOps, the IT ops, the SecOps, everything, and then they're trying to consolidate it down to one thing. Talk about observability, because this trend line seems to play in your favor. Um, and kind of, is this, how much of a growth engine is this going to be, no matter what the market looks like?
Yeah, it's super interesting actually, because observability is a really important growth driver for us. Where what's really driving that, from my perspective, is if you look at what happened during the pandemic, is many organizations of all kinds and sizes across industry had to become more digital. And as they became more digital, they actually have to make sure that those systems are up and running at all times. And so this broad resilience message has been so critical to helping us partner with customers with observability to help them drive the outcomes that they want, because those systems have to be up and running. And so this very steep climb in number of applications that are out there is really driving the demand for observability solutions. Now, the reality is there's lots of stuff that's been bought over a long period of time, and I think customers are staring it down saying, hey, I don't want to have 27 vendors here. I need to narrow this down to a small number, and I need to have an environment that's easy to manage. And so that's another broad theme we see as organizations are driving for resilience. They're also trying to figure out how can we be more efficient and more cost effective. And that's a role that we're playing today.
Yeah, I think that's a big opportunity. I would never ask you to comment on any other company's deals, but even just today, as we are on this pod, and we saw Aptio go, IBM made that acquisition. So you're seeing this sort of really strong trend line towards companies trying to A, manage cloud expense, B, manage their whole IT landscape, C, managing things like labor, and the cost, not just labor for running all the IT. And this is something that you guys at Splunk have been at for a while, is helping companies to do this. And I think if you measure this against that backdrop of austerity,
Yeah.
and of course that backdrop of how efficiency can be created by generative AI, this is a this is, I wouldn't call it table stakes, Gary, but I would say any large company with a significant IT sprawl and architecture really would be somewhat crazy not to have a strong observability plus FinOps practice, to be always looking at their numbers to make sure they're never spending money they don't need to spend.
No, for sure. And I think, this economic environment is forcing people to take a bunch of actions that maybe they wouldn't have taken in a different economic time. And I think, frankly, it's played well for us. We're creating a lot of visibility for them where they didn't have visibility before. And it really speaks to the fact that the volumes of data that people are dealing with, to your point earlier, has just skyrocketed, and they've got to get their arms around that and really understand then how do they drive that into decision making? How do they have visibility around that? And that's a role that we're playing every day.
So let's pivot to something I know you really enjoy talking about, and that's security. So obviously, I've always kind of said, Gary, that the economy matters less with security. It should matter less with security. The risk profiles go up in tougher economic periods, but the need to spend, to invest, and this not only is your career here at Splunk, but really you've spent many years in this particular space. Talk to me a little bit about kind of what are you seeing and what are your customers seeing as it pertains to security?
Yeah, I think there's a few dynamics that are important. I think one is the broad threat environment is probably more complicated today than it's ever been because of the geopolitical conditions that we're operating in. The the world that we're living in is a different place today. The tension with China in particular, I think, is something that's on a lot of people's minds. You couple with that the fact that the attack surface has grown significantly for almost every organization. So as they went digital, that broad digital footprint creates a much more complex attack surface to protect. And so one of the things we see today is that as organizations are thinking about where can I tighten the belt, et cetera, they're being really careful about their cyber spend. And I think cyber for us has been very resilient. And I think will continue to be so because of the operating environment that we have. And I don't, and I honestly just don't see things fundamentally changing. And while there's all this amazing optimism about generative AI, it's yet another set of tools for attackers. And so I think we're going to see more sophisticated attacks as a result of that. And so it's incumbent upon organizations to really think about how do they continue to improve and mature their posture.
I'm glad you mentioned the generative AI thing because one is you really can't have a conversation not talk about it.
Right.
I think I think it's like on a banned book list or somewhere you have to talk about generative AI on every tech podcast now for the next like eternity. I've never seen a trend that's actually not new be so new and then be so
Right.
pervasive.
Yeah.
But I do, because like in my mind, I'm thinking about generative AI for security. And for instance, the ability to automate the creation of more and more sophisticated emails. So like phishing and spear phishing
Sure.
attacks, right? So you're
Yeah.
gonna, the system's going to be able to scrape really personal data and then make these what have been oftentimes very spammy, generic emails from some
Totally.
unknown country into something that's going to feel and look really real because it's like they're going to be able to use imagery and use real things that you've written and typed in the past and do it on a almost a generatively well on an exactly generative basis. I mean, this is big though, and this is
No,
a
and if
reason to
actually,
really.
if you just think it, Daniel, if you just think about it in the most simplest terms, a lot of these attackers live in foreign countries and are foreign nationals. And so English is a second language. Generative AI is going to fix all those issues that were easy to spot
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking
at a
is
very
like,
simple level. Like they're going to be that much more sophisticated. Every single one of those. And why wouldn't the attackers use these tools? They're widely available.
well, Gary, I was thinking about, I went to the Salesforce AI, their,
Yeah.
generative AI launch,
Yeah.
and I was looking at how they were cross-referencing a CRM database and a generative AI tool like OpenAI to create these super personalized emails for sales purposes.
Right.
And it's going to
It's
be,
the same thing.
yeah,
It's the
I mean,
same thing.
it does create some urgency and all the companies that have kind of sitting on their hands or kind of treating security as the minimum viable product for a long time, like
Yeah.
what's the least we can do to meet the requirements and have the ability to back ourselves when we get hacked, because there's always the when, it's never the if anymore these days. It does definitely create a big opportunity, and I think security is going to continue to be top of mind. And the CISO, CIO, CFO board relationships are going to only get more and more tight as this generative and general digital transformation trend continues to
Right.
accelerate. So as we get a couple minutes left here, I'd love to talk about an event that you have coming. We're going to go to the desert in July
We are. We are.
for conf.conf. I'm very excited. I will see you there. Talk a
Yes.
little bit about what everyone can expect from .conf, whether they're there in person or they're following it online.
Yeah, you bet. .conf is our big user conference that we hold annually. It's in Vegas this year, the third week of July. And we're really focused on the innovation that we'll be delivering. AI obviously is a hot topic, and we'll be unveiling our detailed plans or as it relates to AI. And we have some other really interesting announcements that'll help people understand where we're headed from a product point of view. So really looking forward to it. I think it's going to be an amazing event, and we're kind of fully out of the pandemic. We've opened up the audience to be much larger this year as a result of that. So super excited about it.
So AI though, I mean, you'll have at least one big chunk of your keynote will be all about your AI strategy and your new AI offerings then?
Well, a piece of what we'll be talking about and our technical leaders will be discussing is our approach strategy and what people can expect. I think people will be excited about that. And then we also have some other very interesting offerings. Like one of the things that we've talked a little bit about that we're focused on is bridging a lot of these environments that have been hard to bridge. So bridging from IT to OT, so into more traditional manufacturing environments. How can we help organizations deal with those kinds of things as well? So a lot of really good stuff.
Yeah, that's really exciting. So I'll end here. And by the way, just thank you so much for being such a generous guest with your time. I do appreciate it. You mentioned how you're running the business with the sort of, I wouldn't call it worst case, but I'd say a very conservative case. I always like to ask the CEOs that join me here on Making Markets, like, what is your personal sentiment, not your bullishness on the company? I'm not asking for any sort of guy, just kind of your overall feel from being out shopping, out eating, visiting clients, talking to customers, being on airplanes, just kind of what's your overall sentiment about kind of how the market is shaping up? Do you think we are being a little over conservative, or do you think that's still the right posture given kind of what you're seeing out there in the market?
Yeah, I think for me and running the company, I want to make sure that we're well out ahead of these trends, et cetera. But when I'm out traveling the world and looking across the broad markets, I think all executives have pulled back because they felt like they had to. But if you actually look at what's going on, the markets look pretty healthy. And I would say, given how tight the labor market continues to be, it's hard to imagine a recession. So I'm probably a little more positive than a lot of other people on the broader economic opportunity and economic sentiment.
Well, there you have it. I have to say, I share that. I have a cautious dose of optimism, but I also have the cautionary tale of sometimes when it feels too good to be true, maybe it actually is. So, we've had a relatively soft landing so far. I'm hoping that maybe the experts and the economists figured out something so people like us can just keep our heads down. We focus on running the businesses, leading our teams, growing our products, delivering great services, and continuing hopefully to come on the Making Markets podcast to entertain our communities. So Gary Steele, CEO of Splunk, thanks so much for joining me here on Making Markets.
Thank you, Daniel. It's great seeing you today.
Thank you for tuning in to Making Markets. Enjoy what you heard? Please subscribe to get every episode on your favorite podcast platform. You can also watch us on the web at futurumresearch.com/Making Markets. Until next time, this is Making Markets, your essential show for market news, analysis, and commentary on today's most innovative tech companies.